Well, hello. Welcome to this latest broadcast on my book, Discipleship. This is Dennis Pethers speaking to you today from Virginia Beach uh, on the east side of the United States. Let me know if you're there. Say hello to me if you're there, because it's been a while. We've lost something of the flow of this, so hopefully you remember that I'm doing it. And just let me know. Say hi if you're on. But what we're doing, just to remind any of you who are joining maybe for the first time, if anybody is, that this is I'm writing a book called Discipleship. And as I've said a million times, that is not a spelling mistake. It is Discipleship. And the reason it's called Discipleship is because we often think about discipleship, but that often means, well, you become a Christian and you go through some kind of discipleship process in the church. And it's a very church-focused thing. The whole point of this book, Discipleship, is to really underline the fact that if we're going to be followers of Jesus, disciples, we have to do something. We join him in his mission. So discipleship is, I guess it's a play on words, but it's an important play on words, that we have to do something with it. And in this book, what we've been doing, this is chapter 11 we're going to be looking at today. In this book, what we're thinking about is how do we really be people that do following Jesus, so that we're not just talking about it, we don't just listen to it, but we actually get on and do it. And there's going to be 12 chapters in the book, and this is chapter 11 that we're on today. And please say hello to me. I feel like I'm talking to myself at the moment. Perhaps I am. But if you are there, just let me know you're there, so I know that I'm speaking to someone. But this chapter is really beginning now to try to put into practice a lot of things that we've been talking about over the last 11 times or 10 times. This is time number 11. And what we're thinking about today is if we're going to be joining Jesus in his mission, how do we do that as a team rather than just as individuals? Because often the church does it as individuals. We come together and we worship and we do things together. But often when it comes to being a team, people that are joining Jesus' mission outside of the walls of the church, then we find that we're often doing it on our own. So that's what I want to think about today. How do we enable discipleship? How do we equip and encourage people to be disciples who make disciples? But how do we do that? Not just by leaving people to do it on their own. Hey, Nestor, good to see you, my brother. Hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. Je parle un peu de français, s'il vous plaît. But let me begin by talking about what I think is the main core thing that I want to talk about today, and that is really, how do we be a team on mission with Jesus? So let me begin like this. After making the statement, the kingdom of God is near, repent and believe the good news, which Jesus said in Mark chapter 1. What he then did was he immediately set about asking people to follow him. But what he did, which I think is important, and we can so easily miss this, what Jesus did was that he created a team of people that would ensure the continuance of his mission until completion. Jesus achieved parts of the mission that only he could achieve. Only he could do the death and the resurrection and the return to glory. Nobody else could do that. Nobody else could pay for the sins of the world. That was uniquely Jesus. But he wanted that mission and the message of that mission to extend to the ends of the earth. And so he began at the very beginning of his ministry. Before he did any of that, he created a team. And it's important to notice that it was a team. He didn't just call one disciple. He called a group of them. In fact, he called a group that became a team. And the reason he did that, and I'll develop this more as this chapter goes through, the reason that he did that was because by creating a team, Jesus ensured a couple of things. Firstly, that nobody would left to be learned in isolation. And isolation is a really difficult place to be for learning. Very few people learn very much when they're just doing it on their own. In fact, what typically happens when people are left on their own to do things is they don't take the opportunities for learning that are provided, because on their own they feel incapable, they feel that they haven't got the confidence or the strength or the courage, whatever it is. So often left alone, people's amount of learning that takes place is quite restricted. But secondly, the reason that Jesus created team was because he knew that learning experiences would be shared among people in a team. And that leads to deeper learning. So if people are in a team together and they're learning, inevitably they talk to each other as well about what they're learning, what they're understanding, what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And as they do that as a team, that builds each of them up together. So that's why Jesus called a team his disciples or I like to describe them as a small missional community of learning. And another way of saying that is team. And if you look at why Jesus did it, he said he would make his disciples to be fishers of men. That's what he said. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And then their learning took place in community. And you see that when they were sent out to do anything, they were sent in pairs, or as sometimes it says in the larger community of 12 or 70 or 72, whichever. And you see all the time, these people are never isolated. Whenever they go to do anything, they're always doing it with others. And tragically, that's often in contrast to the way that the church makes disciples. The way we tend to do it, and we're going to look at this more in this chapter, the way we tend to do it is, in most cases, not all, there are some great exceptions to this, but in most cases, Christians gather together for a large meeting once a week, and then for a smaller meeting, often, not always, again, once per week. Now, that doesn't even always happen now in many churches, but still it does in many. It says a large meeting and a smaller one. And in some churches, in some parts of the world, they have smaller meetings as part of their Sunday as well. But the thing is, the purpose of these meetings that they have is not first and foremost to equip people to be engaged in mission. The reality is that most Christians are expected to engage in mission and faith sharing, ill-equipped and alone. Let me just share a really simple little story, which has got nothing to do with mission at all, but it's something which, as it happened, it just made my mind start to think. So I was sitting in a coffee house. As I was sitting there, a lady got up to leave, and as she reached the door, it became clear that she was struggling. I noticed that she was carrying a lot of things, and also she had a heavily bandaged hand. She was trying and failing to adjust the things that she was carrying so that she could free her undamaged hand to enable her to open the door wide enough to get through. She was really struggling. So, being a gentleman, I jumped up, helped her open the door, and then offered to carry some of her items to her car so she'd be able to open that door. Of course, I also helped her put the items in the car. As she drove off, I made my way back to my seat in the coffee house, and when I sat down, I began to think about what had just happened. As my imagination sprang into action, I began to think about how relationships might change the experience that the lady had as follows. For example, if she'd been with a close friend, then the friend would almost certainly have helped to carry her items, open the door, and get the items and her into the car. If she'd not been alone, there'd be someone that could help her. If she'd been with a husband, or hopefully, she wouldn't have had to carry anything. I guess what I began to think about was that the closer the relationships that she had with the person in the coffee shop, the more likely she'd have received the support that she needed. Very simple, isn't it? As she didn't have any relationship with a person, she had to receive it from an unknown person who was willing to help. That was me. Had I not been there, it would have been extremely difficult for her. My imagination continued to run, and I thought that most Christians struggle with being a disciple. Certainly a disciple who makes disciples among people outside of the church. On their own, they find it almost impossible to do. And the reality is that so many of them have found it so difficult, they just decided they can't do it, so they've given up. And the reason that they've given up is because there's no one that they're part of a team with that can help them to do it. So it's a very simple story. I get that, of me sitting in a coffee house helping a lady to open a door and put stuff in her car. But the point of it is how much more we can achieve if we do it with somebody else rather than just struggle on our own and find that we can't do it. So let's think about the importance of team and just try to unlock that a little bit. So why did Jesus send the disciples out in pairs, never alone? As I said, I think it's because it's so difficult to achieve things on our own. We need support from each other as we do things. But the challenge is that often in the church, there are so few relationships that are being built upon Jesus' passion and mission. So we don't have, in many churches, that supportive network, whereas we're engaging in mission, there are people that are part of a team. As I said, more often than not, we have fellowship in church. That's a word we often use. When we gather together in the building, in the place, or even in people's homes, as long as it's part of the church program, we have fellowship taking place and groups are formed. But when it comes to mission and sharing Jesus and making disciples, I think it's a tragedy, actually. The tragedy is that there is no sense or very little sense of team at all. And so we don't feel like we're together on mission with people. So what I want to think about is how do we be church in such a way that we function as an effective mission team? That's the key. How do we be team rather than how do we be a congregation of individuals or even groups of fellowship? How do we be a team? Let me just make this point first. Teams. This is why I think teams are so important. Teams have a purpose beyond themselves. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I wrote a lot of this book while I was in Cancun, Mexico, a while ago. And when I'm writing, I find it helpful to follow a daily routine. So each day, after a day of writing, I caught the bus from the local hotel district where I was staying to the city of Cancun. And as you enter the city, the first street on the right is Avenue Bonampak. And just up a little way on the left-hand side is the Bowl Bar. It's a great little place with delicious and healthy food, incredibly inexpensive and very helpful staff. So there, if ever you go to Cancun, I recommend you go to this place in Avenue Bonampak. One time I was on the way to the restaurant, I stepped off the bus, and opposite on a fairly large green, there was a group of young boys, around 7 of them. And I guess they were aged between 13 and 15. As I looked across, I saw one of them take a run, leap off the ground, do a complete 360-degree somersault and land back on his feet. I was impressed. After he'd done this, the others applauded him and then they spoke together. Even though I couldn't hear a word they were saying, it was clear they were encouraging him and offering some suggestions as to what he had done, and I assume how he may improve. Then another boy performed a similar feat. It was a little different, but just as spectacular. His acrobatic leap was followed by similar applause and then discussion, as the boys encouraged and talked with him. I was thoroughly gripped now, so I carried on watching, and I began to see what I thought was just a small group of young boys gathered on a field was clearly much more. I began to imagine what was happening, and I concluded that this was not just a casual gathering or a group just meeting together. These boys were learning and perfecting acrobatic skills that they could use to entertain the hotel guests along the 20-kilometer stretch of hotels that began just the other side of the road from where they were practicing. And as I watched them, a few things occurred to me. Firstly was this: I don't think any of these boys would have ever dreamed that they would have been able to perform the things they did if they were not part of a larger team of people who encouraged, advised, and helped them to do what at one time may have never been something they would ever have dreamed they could have done. Secondly, their time on the green was in preparation for what the team was for. In their case, their purpose, to entertain and raise the funds that it's likely they and their families were in great need of. Thirdly, there was nobody telling each of them how to do a somersault. Each of them did it, and then the others spoke to them about how they could improve. And then I noticed that one of the boys had his left arm in what looked like a bandage or maybe plaster. Clearly, at some point, one of his somersaults hadn't gone to plan. But this didn't stop him, and it almost brought tears to my eyes that after he performed his somersault, he received the loudest applause and cheers from the boys and from me, although he wouldn't have known because I was on the other side of the street, probably receiving some strange looks from the people who were walking by. So what looked like at first a casual group of boys gathering on a green at the edge of a city was clearly an organized team who gathered for a purpose. That's the difference between group and team. Groups just gather. Teams gather for a purpose, to do something beyond themselves. I'm not suggesting that the small team that you form or become part of should learn acrobatics, but I'm convinced that if we meet with the same level of intentionality to join Jesus' mission, and can each share how and what we are doing as we join Jesus' mission, and then encourage and equip each other to do better, we will more effectively join Jesus in his mission. So as I said, what's the difference? Let me just summarize very briefly what is the difference between a group and a team. Now, that story helps me a great deal when I reflect on it. Because I hear you say, but we have small groups in our church and we meet together regularly. That may be the case, but not every group is a team, as I've said. So what is the difference? And these are very, very simple summary. Firstly, a group. And I could say a lot more than this. I may do when I actually finally finish the book. But for now, these are some key things, I think. The first thing is a group exists for the sake of the members of the group as a first priority. So when you form a group, the purpose of the group is the group. And so therefore, a group provides teaching and support for group members to be taken care of. That the whole focus of the group is the group. So people come together, they share food quite often, they study the Word of God together in a Christian context. Maybe someone leads it or they discuss it, then they share their their views about what the Word of God said. Maybe they will then have prayer time, and typically their prayer time will be about different needs the group has, maybe to do with their work situation, their family situation, health, whatever. And all those things are valid. I'm not saying those things should not happen, but that's what a group does. And in many churches all over the world, many of them have small groups that do just that. That's their function. But that's very different from a team, because the focus of a team, in contrast, the team exists, and I'm reading this to get this right. A team exists for an intentional and defined purpose that is for the sake of those who are not in the group. So the purpose of a team isn't the group of people in it. The purpose of the team is to function in such a way that it connects with, it meets the need of, or something, with people who are not actually in the team. It has a purpose beyond itself. That's the key. And so therefore, rather than providing teaching and support just for the group to be taken care of, what a team does is it enables learning and provides support to enable the team to engage in effective mission. That's the purpose of a team. So that by gathering together, by being in a team, in whatever way that is, each of us is becoming more capable of engaging in the mission Jesus wants us to have, because we're part of the team, rather than just being part of a group, which makes each of us feel like we're doing a little bit better ourselves as we continue in our faith. So I'm not seeing many people on here. If you are on, please say hello to me. And if you have any comments, please make them, would you? I always welcome the comments. The reason that I do this broadcast is because I really want to hear from people, just letting me know the things you're thinking. So if you're listening to what I'm saying, if you're reflecting, even if you're watching it not live, but afterwards, I know many people watch this broadcast afterwards. If you do have comments to make on this, please contact me. You can email me and send your thoughts and comments if you're not watching it live. As you can see, DennisPethers@therooftop.org. But I really do want to hear your comments about this. So how do we create a missional team as opposed to a group? There's a story I've told many times, but I think it's a really important story because it helps me to see the difference between group and team. And here's the story. A number of years ago, I was along with a very close friend of mine, at a Memorial Day worship gathering in the United States. The first part of the service was very moving, and many went forward to receive flowers in memory of those who they knew had paid a great price in military conflict. Following this and the singing of a number of songs that were moving, respectful, and a great reminder of the character of God, it was time for the speaker. And the man who spoke was a very well-known TV commentator on matters to do with military conflict. I confess I've not heard of him, but that's not too surprising, as I'm British and live in the UK. He spoke for about 45 minutes, and his theme was, how do we win the war? His talk was a blend of biblical truth, real-life events that he'd experienced in some of the most dangerous war zones across the world. As he talked out of such deep experience, there were times when everybody was moved to tears, and then a moment later we were all laughing. As he unpacked his theme of how do we win the war, he told stories that demonstrated that winning is a team effort. Let me say that again. Winning is a team effort. And that the army team that wins is always the one where nobody gets isolated and disconnected from the others. As soon as anybody becomes isolated, they're not effective, is what he kept saying. After about 30 minutes of making and remaking this point through numerous and incredibly stimulating stories that he told, he stopped. He took a rather long pause and he looked across the large gathering of people. He then said very deliberately, "Church, we are at war. We aren't trying to kill people, we want to give them life, but we have an enemy, a very clever enemy. With our current strategy, we have no hope of winning the war." The people were shocked when he said that. He continued, "The reason that we cannot win is because the soldiers in the front line, that's all of us as Christians living our everyday lives at home, at work, leisure, on the local mission field, where God is calling us all to make him known, we're isolated and alone. Nobody's got our back, and we don't have anybody else's back. Satan has outmaneuvered us. We come together for worship and fellowship inside the walls of our buildings, but when we're in the battle, we're alone, and so most of us give up. We're defeated and do not believe that God could ever use us to build his kingdom. We leave it to the professionals, but that's not God's plan." Brothers and sisters, if we are to win the war, we need each other. Everybody needs to know that somebody has his back, and everybody needs to be given the equipping and resources to engage in spiritual warfare. To put it another way, we must be a team where together we're learning rather than expecting people to learn how to do it alone. So I take from what he said three things. Firstly, the way we gather as Christians must enable us to be effective when we're scattered. The church is a scattered community that sometimes gathers, not a gathered congregation that sometimes scatters. Our focus must be on the front line. Secondly, every person needs to be part of a small team where they can give and receive support, encouragement, equipping, spurring one another on, and everybody has somebody's back. And then thirdly, every person needs to be equipped by doing and then reflecting upon what they did. So that to me is really key when we think about how do we be it. In the last chapter, we were looking at being a missional community. In this chapter, I'm just trying to look at some of the practical things we need to take on board to do that. I want to show a couple of images that will be in the book. The first one is all about focus. And I think part of the challenge why we don't have missional team is because of our focus. So if we could see this, Dave is in the background. There he is, as always, doing a brilliant job. This is just a very simple diagram. And you can see what it shows is the focus being on the church, one church. And I think the challenge as we think about how do we create teams to join Jesus' mission in the community, the challenge is that so often our focus is on the church as a place. And so what we do is, because that's our focus, most of the training, most of the jobs, if you will, most of the ministry that people get involved in is ministry that is focused primarily on how do we keep the church going? How do we run the services and the teaching programs and all the other things that we have to do as church? The focus is on the church. If we bring the magnifying glass out a little bit, you begin to see, and we could draw it out even more. We haven't here, but we may do in the book. But you begin to see that there are actually more than one church building. There's more than one congregation of people meeting, and they're spread across the community. And if we begin to think about the community and the church as one group, one team of people in a community, we begin to take steps towards recognizing the way that we're going to win a city is actually when we begin to think about team being equipped to look outside of themselves and collaborate together to make Jesus known to people outside of the church. Let me show you in another diagram, different way of looking at that. Because I think when we think about and I'll come back to this in just a moment, but when we think about the purpose of church, and I think this is very key as we think about team. If we think about the purpose of church, is it community transformation, which I'm suggesting, or is it just for the church to fill up its building with people? And I think the answer to that I'd like to suggest in this book is that the purpose of church is to transform a community. It's not just to get more people coming through the door on Sunday. It doesn't mean we shouldn't or couldn't have more people coming through the door on Sunday, but that's not the purpose. In fact, I would suggest that the byproduct of real community transformation is that there will be more people gathering together. But if we make that the purpose, then we miss, I believe, the whole point, which is that we should be seeking to transform communities. And here's the challenge. And I think I start with the challenge. I want to build to a more positive picture, because I think the challenge is that when it comes to community transformation and we think about team, often people feel that they're left to transform the community alone. So we just have individuals. And these individual people are seeking to make Jesus known where they are. So perhaps, Dave, if you could just put the individual circle around this so people can see that. Thanks. I think often when it comes to community transformation, making a difference in the community where they work, among people they're friends with, or whatever, all the different places people find themselves in the community, I think what happens is most individual people feel it's incredibly difficult to make a difference in that space. So therefore, they work out their Christian faith within the church, And then when they're not in the church or part of a church gathering or meeting or something, their faith, all the things they believe on Sunday, tend to kind of disappear a little bit on Monday through Saturday, in terms of really believing that God is God and that God has the power to change lives and change communities. And the reason for that is because it's hard. It just is hard to make a difference among people when you're just doing it alone. So individuals doing it alone, I think, will never actually make the difference that we need to make. So if we add to that, and we begin to look at the way Jesus did it, let's add pairs to that. But I think there must be a very important reason why Jesus sent his disciples out in pairs. And I commented on it earlier. I'll come back to it again now. And I think the reason for it is it's very simple, but it's also very deep. And that is that if you've got somebody supporting you, like I said in the story about the lady who couldn't get out of the coffee shop, if there's somebody to help you, so much more can be done. And if we think about that in terms of being on mission with Jesus, if we've got someone who's there for us, who we can talk to about it when it's tough and share our joys with as well, when we really feel like we're getting somewhere, it just changes the whole dynamic. I could spend a lot more time on that. I may do in the book. It's just so important, the difference it makes when you've got somebody with you rather than doing it on your own. But then beyond that, let's add another layer. Small teams, which is what we've been talking about a little bit. When you're then part of a team of people and not doing it on your own, suddenly lots of things begin to change, because now, as part of a small team of people, you've got a group of people, which is a team, that you can share with. You can say to them when things aren't going well, when things are going well. You can talk about how tough you find it or how great it is, whatever. You can study the word and things together and really dig out some truths that can help you to be effective in making Jesus known. And because you're part of a team, you don't feel as if you're just isolated and need to give up. And then the other layer I'd like to add to this is the large gathering. There is a value in gathering together in a big group of people as well. So that picture you see at the center, community transformation, and I think that we will see communities transformed much more effectively if the church thinks of itself as team, and within that team it provides opportunities for individuals to be connected with pairs, with small teams, and then part of a larger thing, but all pulling in the same direction, which is the purpose of the church, which is to bring community transformation. So let me just for a moment just talk about the purpose of the church, and then I'd like to go through very quickly some of these things that I've begun to outline there. So the purpose of the church is not the church. This is the first point. The purpose of the church is not the church, but the transformation of the community. Secondly, community transformation will take place as the church, as people, function as a team that's being equipped and deployed to engage in community transformation. And thirdly, this transformation will take place as individuals are reached and discipled, as the spheres of society are impacted by Christians. And then, if you think about it, there's so much more, and I'm not saying this very well, forgive me, there's so much more that can be achieved when the church does this together with a united intentional purpose. And that means not just a local church doing it on its own, but the church recognizing within the community that there is one church in one community. But the main point I want to make there is that the church, when it thinks of itself as team and begins to use the gatherings that it has to be equipping opportunities for people to feel part of team, to be empowered to do the job, that's when we're going to really see things change. Because every church, every local church has a series of things that it does. They have worship gatherings, they have Bible studies, they have prayer meetings, they often have youth and children's events or groups. They have special events around the Christian festivals. They do all these things. They have lots of meetings, lots of activity taking place, programs, whatever you want to call them. But largely, what they do is they provide opportunities for people that come to church to participate in a meeting that will help them to grow as a Christian, rather than have the intentional purpose of being equipping opportunities for people to make a difference to those outside. So let's just, if I can, let me just go through a few headings under that that I would like just to share with you in terms of what this looks like, because I want to look at the opportunities that this provides, because I think what we've done is we've created spaces, and I talked about this a little bit in the last chapter. And when I finally write the book, I think I'll probably blend these two chapters together a bit better than I have in the current way, which is the purpose of me doing this online stuff. And welcome, Preston. Good to hear from you, brother, and Joy as well from Bangladesh, and others that are joining, Jennifer as well. Great. Please keep your comments coming. I really would appreciate them because I want these two chapters and the next one as well to be really, really helpful in terms of how do we build the right kind of team dynamic. And a lot of that is about the spaces that we use as well. And part of the challenge is that these spaces that we've created, they typically provide passive learning experiences, and they're disconnected from the mission field, which is where we really learn. And if we're going to create mission teams, it's important that we have a strategy for adapting towards a mission team mindset. So let me just spend a little bit of time on that. And I'm just looking at my notes here, which are a little bit unhelpful. So just give me a moment just to, as you know, this is a work in progress. So you're very patient with me. So let's just think about the things I talked about in the outline that I gave. I talked about individuals, pairs, small teams, and large gatherings. And the large gathering is typically what people think of as the church. But let's not think of it that way. Let's think of the church as all of these different things, and then ask the question, which part does each of these play in helping the church to become a team? So I do think that large gatherings have a place. So sometimes people ask me the question, Dennis, are you for small groups or large gatherings? And the answer is both and all, but I'd rather call them teams than groups. I don't think it has to be one thing or the other. It seems to me that the way it works best is when there's a blend, and that's why I love the image that you're looking at the moment, is when all these things are connected together. It's not one or the other, it's all of them combining together. So what does a large gathering provide that helps a team to be effective? Just a few things here. But firstly, I think when we get together in a large group, the use of music, singing, and other creative ways of expressing our heart worship to God can be really, really powerful. I don't think these should be a performance to attract people, but I think that what they should more than anything be is provide an opportunity for encounter with God that involves what I call an holistic response of mind, heart, and body, where we come together to just express to God who He is and how much we love Him and adore Him and praise Him. And sometimes people have said to me, Dennis, do you think we should have worship? Yes, but it's not because by worshiping God we make Him feel better about us. I think in many ways, when we really express our heart passion to God, what it does, it transforms us, and that's what God wants. He doesn't want us just to sing songs for the sake of singing songs or go through a worship service because it's Sunday morning and that's what we should do. The whole point of it is that we open our hearts and our minds in an encounter with God, which is transformative for us. And when we're reminded again and again and again of the amazing power and love of this enormous, massive God, then it actually inspires us to want to be part of a team that helps other people come to know this amazing truth. So I think what we call worship in all its varieties, I think, is absolutely critical. I think prayer as well, by coming together in a large group of people, a large gathering of people to pray together, is again a really powerful thing to do. But I think so often in the large gathering, we miss the opportunity of that. We don't really get the benefit, because what often happens in church when we have a large gathering on a Sunday, we often pray very little. I get to preach in many churches around the world, and some of them, the only thing they pray for on a Sunday is the offering. It's the only thing they pray about. They thank God for the people that give the money. But what about if we didn't just pray for the offering, or didn't just pray for a list of people in the church who have got illnesses and sicknesses? And those things are important to pray for. I'm not saying they're not. But what about if we also prayed for the community, using pictures and press articles and news stories from the community all about where we are, and share those, put them up on the screen if we can, let people see them, and then pray into these situations happening in our community and ask God to give us the power to be part of the transformation of these things that we see, so that when we meet in this large gathering, we're not disconnected from the community, but we're connecting with it and praying into it together. All of us, every one of us, part of a team that's thinking, how do we as a community change for good and for God what's happening in our community? And then thirdly, and these aren't in any order, some would say this one should come first, and that's okay. I might even put it first when I finally write the book. But thirdly, preaching that communicates the truth of God's word. I think there's a real place for that in the large gathering, where somebody who is gifted and anointed as a teacher, a preacher, a communicator of God's word can actually inspire and challenge this larger gathering in a crowd together from wherever they're at. Some of them will be very committed followers of Jesus. Some people may not even yet be Christians, and there'll be all different steps between that. But by communicating this truth of the gospel to people, then what that means is that as they come and they gather, they can be inspired and encouraged and equipped and informed, so that they can then feel that they can be part of this mission team that the church is. And they leave the gathering, if you like, with an excitement and a passion to go and tell people about Jesus. I think the large gathering can achieve that. And therefore, it should be something which we really focus on making as great an encounter with God as it possibly can be. So I don't think we should minimize it and say, oh, the Sunday service doesn't matter. I don't like calling it a service. I think we should call it a gathering, because the service takes place 24/7. And then I think the other thing that can be a part of a large gathering, which I find is largely missing from most large gatherings that Christians have, is regularly, every week, people sharing with the large gathering about their life on mission with Jesus, just talking, sharing about how they're trying to make Jesus known, telling stories of people they've had conversations with. And they don't have to be just success stories. They can just be part of the ongoing process, so that when we gather and we keep hearing from people from among us who are seeking to be part of the transformation of the community, it reminds us over and over again that we are part of a team of people that doesn't exist for our own sake, but exists for the sake of transforming the community. So I think that there's a really really important thing there, which we must focus on. If we're going to be a team that's on mission with Jesus, the large gathering provides a great place, context for us together to encounter God and to hear the message, and then to feel inspired and equipped to connect with the community and make a difference. So let's have the large gathering. But then I think now we begin to drill down a little bit, and I think begin to look at what else do we need. And this is where I think we have to really think about it as church, what else that we need. Because, again, the space that we provide, often in our buildings as church, is often we have other, in America, they tend to call it the church campus. Where I come from in the UK, our church's buildings aren't big enough to call them campuses. But nevertheless, it's the same kind of thing. We have all these various rooms and different things. And in those rooms, learning takes place, but more often than not, it's kind of passive learning, rather like what happens in the large gathering. In large gatherings, it's difficult to do much other than passive learning, but in the smaller rooms, you can do something much more. And these can be in the church campus, they can be in people's homes, but these smaller gatherings of people, and I like to call them small teams, as you saw on the diagram that I created, not small groups. They provide a great opportunity for people to really, really begin to learn and be effective in missional engagement. Because in a smaller team, there are things that can happen that can't happen in a larger gathering, just because of the dynamic of it. So let's just go through a few of those things. Firstly, in a smaller team, the learning experience isn't restricted to listening and watching. In a large gathering, but primarily that's mostly what you can do: listen or watch. But when you come to a smaller team, you can do so much more than that. You don't have to just listen and watch. You can talk with each other. You can converse. You can dialogue. You can connect with each other in much deeper ways. And what that means is, secondly, that there's an opportunity in a smaller team for people to ask questions about things they don't understand or find difficult to accomplish. They can talk much more openly and honestly with each other about what they're finding difficult. They can be real about their fears, their challenges, their joys of engaging in mission. All of that becomes possible. Fourthly, they can be equipped in different ways so that as they seek to make Jesus known, they can actually find out from one another, learn from one another different skills that they need to actually make Jesus known. Then there's fifthly what I call supportive accountability. We're not alone, we're doing this together. And then sixthly, number 6, an ongoing team that can seek to develop missional opportunities. And as I've said before in this book, the context in which learning takes place will largely shape the amount of true learning. And so when we think about small teams, typically, those small groups, as church call them, often meet in a safe place, a safe environment, either on the church campus or in people's homes. But they're very much a place where the group that comes together is coming together for its own sake, and it's in a safe environment. If we're going to be small teams seeking to engage with the community rather than small groups just doing church Bible study, then perhaps we should think differently. So, for example, here's a few things that those small teams can do. Firstly, have some of the meetings that they have actually in the community, outside of a safe place. For example, and I know a number of churches that I've worked with that I've suggested this, and they do this, to meet in a coffee place in America or England, Starbucks, whatever it is, whichever country you're in, it may be different, but meet in a place which is not just shut off from the world. Meet in a place where other people are there as well. But as well as that, as well as meeting together in places outside of a safe environment, actually more important than that, excuse me, have a little sip of water just a sec. Any questions you have, by the way, any comments, I'd be grateful for. I see a few more people are on, so please talk to me. That was better. As well as thinking about just meeting in more public places, and more important than that is identifying opportunities in the community and seeking to address these things. And I think, and I've just written a few things down here, and I'll expand on this a bit more in the book as well. But for example, a small team can look around the community and say, what are some of the needs that exist? How could we connect? And I've written down, for example, a local school or college or a project where there may be some need for people to come in and help in some way, or provide support, or provide whatever, just hands and feet for all kinds of things in the community. Most communities have all kinds of needs for people to come and volunteer and help. And if we look at our community and begin to identify as these different small teams, what are some of the things where we could plug in and help? Or what are some things where nothing's being done that we could begin to do? What are some exciting initiatives that we could begin as we just look around and see the needs of our community? Then that begins to mean that this small team together as part of the overall is engaging in, and then when each team begins to do that, that's when we could begin to see real community transformation taking place. Thirdly, every person can engage in mission just on their own, but the point I'm making is that happens much more effectively when we do that as part of a team, so we're not left alone. What I'd like to do as I draw to the end of this chapter is to just look at a method that has been used in the past, because I think it's a great model, I find. Now, you may have heard of a man called John Wesley. And John Wesley is the founder of what is called the Methodist Church. which many of you will have heard of the Methodist Church. What you may or may not know is that the reason that it's called the Methodist Church is because it had a method. That sounds pretty obvious, but it's true. It had a method. And the method that he had, obviously it was God. See you, Preston. Thanks for being part of it, mate. Obviously it was God, but God inspired Wesley to use a method. And the method that Wesley used, as well, of course, as the power of God, but the method that Wesley used was incredibly significant in terms of the impact that the Methodist movement made back in the times when it was spreading like fire across the world. And at the heart of his method, what he recognized at the heart of his method was that being transformed by Christ is not easy to do alone. So to be transformed by Christ and to bring transformation is not easy to do alone. He was engaging with people who were not living the Christian life. They were outside of the church. He would go and speak in cities all over the world, really, and thousands of people would gather. Many of them were people that had no connection with the church, and they were living lives that people live with without Jesus. And he would have these great outdoor meetings, and many would come to his mass gatherings, and then many would decide they wanted to follow Jesus. But see, what he realized was that if these people who didn't know Jesus, really didn't understand what it meant to live for Jesus, if they were going to follow Jesus, then you couldn't just say to them, right now you're a Christian, here's a hymn book, and just now live for Jesus. He knew that they would have to be helped to overcome several obstacles and challenges in their lives that would prevent them being effective. He also knew that that was true of many people in the church as well. Maybe the reasons are different, but it's the same problem. People outside of the church, I think, who are living lives that are nothing like Jesus wants, they have many obstacles to overcome to really join Jesus' mission. But people in the church often have become so familiar with church, they need help to overcome a different set of obstacles, but the obstacles still exist. So what Wesley did was that he made sure that when people became Christians, when they became followers of Jesus, to ensure that they would be Christian people that follow Jesus and could join him in his mission to expand and share the message of Jesus with other people, he made sure that every one of them was part of a small group. As you know, I prefer to call them team. And in that group, they'd receive instruction and support that would help them to continue in their faith and become effective disciples and leaders. And the ones that were effective, they became leaders of the groups. So it grew and grew and grew as people were in groups, became effective, then they led groups, some people that led groups, and on and on and on it went. But the key thing is at the core of each meeting was a set of questions that were used to create a context where each person could be honest about how they were progressing or not as followers of Jesus. Now, he asked more questions than I've included in the book. I've summarized them very, very, very briefly. The key to the questions he asked were these. And this was really important. What sins have you committed this week? What victories over sin have you seen this week? How can we help you to see more victories over sin? They were the questions. They did ask more than that, but that was the hub of it. What sins have you committed? What victories over sin have you seen? How can we help you to see more victories over sin? Because he realized that in a small group of people, as you ask those questions and were honest about them, that would lead to people experiencing real transformation. Because they didn't come to a large gathering, if you will, and just keep these things secret, just hide them away somewhere. They were actually able to bring them to a group of people they could trust and they could talk with. They could be honest about the things they were facing. So here's a few things that provided. Firstly, it provided the ability for honesty. They didn't need to pretend everything was okay by just never talking about it. They could be vulnerable. They knew that being a Christian is a real challenge and something that would only do effectively with help. They needed help to do it, so they could be vulnerable about it. And they also could be accountable. Because if they could share with people some of the struggles they had, what it would mean is that people could stand with them and as they were honest about their struggles, people would actually hold them accountable to things they said they were going to do, so that they would be able to see victories, if you like, and they would be able to move forward. So victorious is the final thing. By being honest and open with each other, they could learn how to overcome temptation, turn away from things that they shouldn't be doing, like sexual sin, ambition, money, power, loads of things that stop them being the kind of Christians that God wanted them to be, which they struggled to accomplish on their own, but they could do it in these groups, which meant that they no longer felt they were living a secret or a double or a defeated life. But they recognized that this transformation can take place much more effectively in a small group, I prefer team of people, which meant they felt empowered. By seeing God's victories transforming them, they had a passion to share the message of a God who is powerful enough to change lives. God's power to change lives wasn't just a bunch of words that they knew to be true. It was actually their experience. But I'd like to add to that, that was Wesley's method with these small groups of people. But I'd like to think if we have small teams of people and we're going to meet together and think, how do we transform the community in which we live? I think Wesley's questions are great questions for us to ask and to be asked and to answer with each other. But I also think that there are some other questions that would be good to add to Wesley's questions. And they would be things like this. So each time a team gathers, to ask the question, how have you joined Jesus in his mission since we last met? Talk, whatever. And this may be, we may do that one-on-one with people or as we gather all together. But just to ask people, how have you done it? And that, not with a sense of criticism or judgment, but just a genuine question. How have you done it? And I find a constant reminder to me about doing things that I should be doing helps me to do it. Because life gets busy. It's easy to get distracted or preoccupied with a bunch of other things and my own fears and uncertainties and guilt, whatever I feel. Could often mean I could easily, as a Christian person, go through most of my weeks and never engage in mission with people. But having people that ask me regularly, how's it going? How have you done it? How have you joined? Just brings it back to the fore and keeps it a focus. And then we could ask a question like, where do you feel you've been making progress in seeing God at work and using you? So talk about where you feel as if you're making progress, you're getting better at doing this. And again, having the opportunity to talk about that is really affirming, because as we hear each other talking about it in the team, it builds us all up. And then in what ways do you feel you've not done very well and need help, support to be more effective? And questions like this, what they do is regularly being asked is they build us up, they help us to move forward. Because if we can be honest and say, well, I'm trying to share my faith with a friend at work or at college or something, but they're asking me questions, I'm not sure how to answer them, or then that team can begin to help you to find ways to answer. And if they can't, then that's what we've got leaders in the church for. They can come alongside, they can help us to do it as well. So that all these things working together, and then this team, you can do things in pairs as well. And then you've got that whole grid that I showed earlier on of the individual not being left alone, but being linked to pairs, linked to small teams, linked to the larger gathering. Together, we're creating a whole movement of people which are being equipped to join Jesus in his mission. The last thing I want to look at, I'm actually going to blend this into the last, because I've got to finish in a moment. So I'm going to blend this into the next chapter. But the last thing that I'll look at in this whole section, which I'm doing of how do we be a team, is the people who enable learning as a team. And what I'm going to do is blend that into chapter 12, which will be the last chapter. But what I'll be talking about in that next time is how something the church has really got to think about is if we're going to have these teams through the large gatherings, small teams, connecting in pairs, so individuals feel empowered, all of that, then something critical we're going to have to face is how do we equip people who currently in most churches lead small groups, Sunday school, whatever. How do we equip them to become people that can enable learning to take place so Christians can engage in the community rather than just leading Bible studies that people come to as groups largely for their own benefit? But we're going to finish it there today because I've got to be on another call in 5 minutes. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. Any comments you have, please put them down or send them to us by email. And if you're watching the recording of this, would appreciate any comments you have. Next week is the last chapter of the book, but it may be after that. What I'd like to do is to have a few other conversations just following on from that, just in terms of how I might shape the book. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. But thanks ever so much, and have a great day. God bless you. Take care. Bye.